Happy Monday. Welcome to another episode of Learn with Lo. I'm really excited to connect with you guys today. I have had so much positive feedback on our series of Learn with Lo. We did a really deep dive into gut health. If you joined us through really just the majority of the month of June, we talked a lot about gut health, all the way from leaky gut and the truths behind food sensitivities, debunking some myths behind dysbiosis treatment, right? And that led us right into this conversation around the liver. And we've gotten a chance to really dive into a lot of the liver detoxification pathways, how the liver is actually responsible for not only just, sometimes we just think of liver and we think of alcohol, right? And that is a true correlation. But really, the liver is what is responsible for a lot of our immune responses. It's responsible for a lot of our mood regulation. It's responsible for cholesterol, thyroid conversion, and even hormone detoxification. So we know that the liver plays a huge role. And if you were with us last week, we even dove into how the gut, liver, and the skin are intimately connected. And we got a chance to really debunk some of the more conventional dermatology treatment behind some of your common skin conditions like acne and eczema and psoriasis and dermatitis. You guys had so many amazing questions I was able to field. Like I said, a lot of DMs and direct people towards my Renew Your Gut program because they had never been offered an opportunity to really actually dig into a lot of the root causes of their chronic skin concerns. And so it was just a very eye-opening and aha moment for us to be able to talk about how the skin is really our body's major detox organ when the gut and the liver aren't able to keep up, right? And so a big part of that is looking at, again, the liver and how it functions. And a lot of the functions of our liver detoxification are under a strong genetic influence. So today, I really wanted to give a time and some highlight towards not just the liver and how it functions from a nutrient perspective or a hormone perspective, but honestly from a genetic perspective, because I'm seeing more and more in clinic where individuals are getting honestly kind of dismissed and even a little bit misdiagnosed by conventional medicine when there's not enough due diligence done for testing that individual or letting them know that genetic deficiencies behind liver detoxification does exist, and it is behind a lot of individuals being at a higher risk for certain diagnosable conditions, which we'll talk about today. So, like I said, I really wanted to take this time to connect the dots between the drainage pathways and the skin and the gut and really kind of loop in this outside piece of the puzzle that hardly nobody is talking about. Because when we finally do talk about liver health and really the terrain of the gut or gut testing, there's honestly still a major reason why so many of you and so many of my current patients still feel stuck and spinning their wheels. They feel like they're reacting to everything. And sometimes they honestly, I hear this all the time, which is really unfortunate, is individuals feel like their body is broken. And that's just not true. And a big part of that actually goes back to understanding your unique genetic variability that may be underlying factor to even a lot of the surface level things that you feel like you're doing all the right things, whether it's nutritionally, lifestyle wise. We talked about some of the connections of the liver a couple episodes too, where some individuals are like, I'm dry brushing, I'm doing vibration plates, I'm doing sauna therapy, I'm eliminating all the foods, I'm taking all the cleanses and the supplements. I'm like, yes, but have you accounted for genetic variability? Because modern medicine, I will say, even when I say the term genetic, we have to at least start by understanding that your genes and your genetic makeup is something you are born with, and it is not something that you can change. So some people, I would say, especially even when you get into like modern healthcare, you kind of get two different camps here, okay? Two wildly different thought processes around how genetics should play a role in the modern healthcare experience. So you kind of have like one camp that blames everything on genetics. And you hear terms like, oh, well, you just have IBS in your family, or that's just how your body was born, that you were just born that way, or yeah, your family history puts you at a genetic predisposition to high cholesterol, right? We hear those things all the time. And then when we hear them from trusted medical providers, we kind of start to absorb it as truth. And what then happens is it keeps a lot of people stuck in what I call victim mentality, because we get almost honestly kind of brainwashed into thinking there's nothing we can do about it. We were born with it. We just have to live with it. And I'm just going to roll over and die, right? It's like, oh, I guess I was just genetically predispositioned to have high cholesterol and there's nothing I can do about it, right? Or everybody in my family has had a diagnosable cancer, or everybody in my family has an autoimmune disease and it runs in my family, so I'm going to get it too. And it's like, actually, that is so far from the truth. I think it's about understanding genetics, but also using it as an empowered way to understand our unique genetic variations and then how we can support ourselves differently than our family members did, so that those genetic predispositions never even express themselves. Because I promise, even if you have the genetic predisposition for high cholesterol, doesn't mean that you're going to have high cholesterol. It's all a matter of how you load the gun with your lifestyle and your overall nutritional choices or strategic supplementation, right? So, and then there's one camp that blames genetic on everything, kind of keeps us stuck a little bit in victim mentality and feels a little bit disempowering. Then you have another camp where they just honestly ignore genetics completely and they dismiss your real lived experience. They completely overlook how your biology impacts the way that you're responding to food or supplements or stress in your environment. And you're told it's like, oh, it's just anxiety, or that's just a coincidence, or worse, they're like, oh, that's completely normal, right? It's normal for a woman to feel that way as your age, or it's normal as you get older to experience that. It's like, that's not always true, because here is the truth. It's like your genes might be the blueprint. Yes, for sure. They might load the gun, but they're not the outcome. It's not what ultimately pulls the trigger. What ultimately pulls the trigger is us taking full empowerment and ownership over our health and realizing wow, that's really cool to understand that about my genetics and see that genetic pipeline play out, and how I get to break that generational pattern by understanding how does that then impact me differently from a food, a diet, a supplementation, a gut health perspective. How am I actually pulling the trigger on whether those genes are expressed or not? Listen, we cannot change our DNA, and I'm not here to convince anybody that that's possible, but we have far more control over how those genes are expressed than we've ever been taught. Okay, so we have DNA within our cells, but depending on the environment tells those genes whether they're turned on or turned off. There's plenty of genetic predispositions that we all walk around with, and they're just turned off. They just sit dormant. They never actually come to fruition because there's not the perfect storm of an environment that actually pulls the trigger. That's what we're looking for. And your genetics are really a starting point, but they're definitely not the end of the story. So think of kind of circling this genetics conversation then back to the liver and our detoxification pathways. Think of your detoxification pathways almost as a highway system within the body, right? There's lots of bends and twists and turns and exits and ramps. And also sometimes there's some construction, there's some speed bumps, there's some detours, right? So some people are born with a 6-way or 6-lane expressway when it comes to detoxification patterns, and even call it the Autobahn, right? Things are just moving and shaking straight down that highway. But there's certain individuals that their detoxification highway, it contains a lot more detours and speed bumps along the way, and they're not able to move toxins and hormones and things like histamines or neurotransmitters. They're not able to move those with as much ease and grace as maybe somebody that was born with a little bit different genetic predispositions. So some people, if we kind of stick with our construction analogy here, I always say some people aren't working with a 6-lane expressway when it comes to detoxification patterns. Some people are working with a single lane dirt road. Maybe there's a detour, maybe there's some construction, maybe some roads were already kind of crowded before you even got there. And then let's add in modern life. Let's add in the picture of gut dysbiosis. And then let's add in the picture of environmental toxins. Let's add in the picture of chronic dieting and chronic stress, nutrient deficiencies, poor bile flow. It's then all of a sudden, even the best road system out there would get backed up if considering all of those things, let alone somebody that's operating with like a single dirt road and you add all of those barriers in. It's not that these people, you're not too sensitive. It's not that your body is broken. It's not that you're reacting to everything because you're just stressed and because you're just unlucky. Right? It's like, no, this is biologically unique to each human. Some people are navigating a little bit less of an ideal detoxification pathway, and no one really just handed you the right map to know how to navigate your specific detoxification tendencies. Okay. So sometimes people can see this playing out. You don't necessarily need genetic testing to determine this, although we can do that. I do that frequently for individuals that are curious about it, but we can kind of start to see this take shape if you look at your family lineage, as well as maybe even like into what your children might struggle with. So let's talk about how your body detoxes, and let's talk about some of those genetic gatekeepers that actually are running the show a lot more than we sometimes want to give it credit for. And we just want to blame everything on like, oh, you were just born that way, or it's just stress, or it's just age, or you're getting older. It's like we have to be able to feel a little bit more empowered behind this information, because there's actually a lot more we can do about it than we're giving credit for. So what's the liver's job? High level overview here. The liver's job is to literally take anything that could potentially harm you, whether it's toxins, excess hormones, histamines, medications, mold, even the byproducts of different stress. And the whole goal is to take those and convert them into a form that the body can safely eliminate through urine, stool, and sweat. Okay. So know that this happens in 3 phases. We have phase 1 activation of the liver, where the body's job is to take things from a fat soluble state and get them ready for excretion. Okay, so that's what the body does. It stores things in a fat soluble state until it feels well resourced enough to get it out of the body. If it does not feel well resourced enough to get it out of the body, it's going to stay in the fat soluble state. No matter how much we like push, pull, vibration plate, fast, you could do all you want. And the body's like, nope, not moving this from the fat soluble state until I feel well resourced enough. So that's phase 1. Phase 2 is when we have to take that toxin from a fat soluble state and we have to make it water soluble, which makes it less reactive so that we can safely eliminate this. This is called phase 2 detoxification of the liver. And I want you guys to remember this, put an asterisk star circle around phase 2 detoxification, because this is where the genetic SNPs actually start to throw a wrench in the system. And when I use the word genetic SNPs is SNP, and it stands for single nucleotide polymorphisms. Woo, science talk there. It's really just saying genetic predispositions. So phase 2, liver detoxification, if things are going to get a little sluggish, a little bottlenecked, a little slow, it's going to be the phase 2. And this is where people probably show up with some of those genetic deficiencies, but they don't know it. And they're getting dismissed by a lot of modern medicine because of it. Phase 3 detoxification is where we actually get it out of the body. Again, urine, stool, and sweat being those major pathways. But also recognize it's like if our bile is sluggish, if the microbiome is off, if our lymph tissue is congested, toxins don't leave. They're just going to recirculate. We talked about that a couple episodes ago, right? So we have to understand that this has to go from phase 1 all the way to phase 3 to be successful. And right in the middle is a very key step of phase 2. And that phase 2 is more often than not where those genetic deficiencies are going to show up. And they're going to start to throw like some speed bumps and some detours in that detox expressway. So high level, this is not going to be like a genetics masterclass by any means, but I want to highlight kind of the 4 main genetic variants that I tend to look for and speak about in practice, and the 4 most common ones that tend to come up with a lot of the patients that I see and work with. Some of these might be familiar to you. Some of these you'll be like, you're speaking another language, Lauryn. Yes, we're getting a little bit sciencey today, but I promise I'll try to keep it high level. So the first genetic variation that we tend to see is called MTHFR. Some people are more familiar with MTHFR. You maybe have heard of this one because it impacts a process called methylation. That is in that phase 2 detoxification where we have to physically add a methyl group or a methyl donor in order to make that toxin water soluble so that we can pee, poop, or sweat it out. Critical to detox things like estrogen, heavy metals, neurotransmitters. If this MTHFR gene is sluggish, you're more likely to struggle with migraines, fatigue, infertility, anxiety, depression, high cholesterol, high blood pressure. So I see lots of individuals who come in and they have 1 or more or 5 or more of those types of symptoms. And guess what? They're getting medicated for all of those individually. They're on migraine medication, they're on anxiety medication, they're on cholesterol medication, they're on blood pressure medication, and they're struggling with fertility. And they're like in the process of doing IUI or IVF, right? And it's like, this is interesting. Has anybody ever tested you for MTHFR genetic variant? And it's like half the time they're like, no, that's like never come up. This is interesting because I think a lot of this actually fits together. We don't need to treat you possibly for all 5 of these conditions separately. This is probably something where we need to go back and understand how your liver is functioning or not functioning optimally. And now all of a sudden it's a domino effect because we're working at the root cause, right? So MTHFR is a big one. Number 2 is called COMT or COMT. Sometimes you'll hear it. COMT breaks down our catecholamines in the body, which is really just a fancy way of saying things like dopamine, epinephrine, norepinephrine. All of those are catecholamines. So if you struggle with COMT deficiencies, you're more likely to feel like wired and tired. These individuals tend to have more of the mood related disturbances. They feel overstimulated. They feel very reactive to caffeine. They're more prone to PMS symptoms for my females. They're more prone to estrogen dominance like endometriosis or fibroids. They have a lot of like almost like ADD or ADHD like symptoms, mood swings, sleep disturbances. And again, they're getting individually treated for all of those things. They're like, I'm on a sleep sedative, I'm on ADHD medication, I'm on birth control because my PMS is out of control. Like all of these things, I'm like, that's like super interesting how these start to kind of fit together. Number 3 is, I kind of put 2 together here because they relate to the same thing. And this is your DAO or HNMT pathways. These are 2 enzymes in the liver that are responsible for breaking down histamines, okay? Histamine, we usually think of it as more of your like allergy kind of reactions, and it absolutely is. Histamines are secreted in the mast cells of the immune system in response to different foods, in response to different infections, in response to stress. So this DAO and HNMT enzymes, with these SNPs, you're more likely to react to high histamine foods. And also with my histamine sensitive patients, they are notorious for having kind of almost the opposite reaction to things that other people would. They think they're crazy. I'm like, you have classic histamine symptoms. Has anyone ever told you that before? They're like, no, never in my life, right? So things that normally would feel good for individuals like increasing their fermented foods, doing more probiotics, doing apple cider vinegar, like those are awful for someone with histamine intolerances. And so they're out there like trying to listen to the Instagram algorithm. And I'm like, no, we can't just willy-nilly throw stuff at a wall to see what sticks. Like if you have genetic SNPs that are preventing your body from being able to break down and clear histamines out of your body, your histamine bucket is going to overflow. And now all of a sudden you have all of these chronic hives, you have itchy skin, you have bloating, you have food intolerances, you've been diagnosed with mast cell activation syndrome. You've been diagnosed with Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. You've been diagnosed with long COVID. You've been diagnosed with PMDD. I'm like, guys, these are all related to histamines. These are not separate entities. Like we have to start treating people as one person, right? So the DAO and HNMT SNPs can be really interesting for those individuals that struggle with high histamine issues. And then number 4, I call these your HLA variants, and HLA variants impact your immune system. So individuals that have natural HLA variants are more prone to mold sensitivity, autoimmune disease, and chemical sensitivities. So some people feel like they're really reactive to everything in their environment and nobody can really explain why. They have a lot of airborne allergies, they have a lot of food sensitivities, they maybe have like lived in a moldy environment or been exposed to a moldy environment before and like they were the only one with all of these symptoms, or they've been diagnosed with chronic Lyme disease or autoimmune conditions or chronic inflammatory responses, chemical sensitivity. So these HLA variants, it doesn't mean that you're going to have those things. It just means that you're more sensitive than the average bear because your immune system doesn't clear these things out quite as well. So looking at these like 4 major genetic SNPs between MTHFR, COMT, DAO, HNMT, HLA. I know I'm throwing a lot of letters and acronyms out there, but I just want you guys to become more familiar with understanding that you could be doing all of the right things and still be stuck because your detox pathways are genetically slower and no one has helped you build the right infrastructure. And that is a problem to me because your biology just needs a different strategy, one that works with your enzymes, not against them. So even if you have some of these genetic deficiencies or you suspect you have some of these genetic deficiencies, it is not victim mentality. It's not roll over and die like, oh my gosh, I'm just prone to these for the rest of my life. It's like, no, this is us now knowing how we can support your body better. So the new paradigm and the new thought process I want to invite you into is genetic predisposition is not a sentence. It's just a strategy, right? It's not a life sentence, I guess I should say. But it's really only when you work with a provider that knows how to interpret it and knows how to zoom out and really look at the whole picture. And that's why with the lowdown methods, I practice and I teach holistic medicine in this exact way. Like I said, same idea as us talking about the liver and the gut and the skin. If you have some of these genetic detoxification deficiencies, we have to see what's going on with your gut health. There is way too much interplay between what's happening in the gut and what's happening with the liver. If you already have some genetic deficiencies, we got to make sure that gut health is all cleaned up, or you're going to feel all of those genetic predispositions times 10. Okay. So this isn't about rushing in and thinking I'm going to change your genetics. No, I'm going to remove the barriers that are making it so difficult for you to detox in the first place. This is where my Renew Your Gut program comes in. If you are not familiar with my Renew Your Gut program, it is a bundle that I put together so that you can take advantage of a GI map test, which is an at-home stool microbiome test that's not offered by your doctors. And it gives us an opportunity then to work closely together with some individual follow-up sessions so that we can interpret the results, come up with a game plan, and start to understand how are we going to put all of the pieces of this puzzle together. Now, we can always add on with the Renew Your Gut program, you can always add on additional genetic testing, which I would always encourage because I think that does full circle give us an opportunity to not just deal with some of the issues at hand right now that are affecting your detoxification pathways, but what that long-term maintenance plan is going to look like based off of your unique genetics. So I really wanted to bring highlight to this. I've been talking about it more and more. It seems to come up for a lot of my individuals that, like I said, tend to be a little bit more of your complex kind of cases, and they haven't really been able to have these conversations before. And so know that this is a safe space to be able to talk about all of those influences. So if you're curious about some of these genetic deficiencies yourself, yes, we can test for these. And yes, we can also feel empowered to actually operate in a very, very healthy pattern, breaking some of those generational tendencies and some of those generational predispositions does not mean that you have to have them either. So very exciting times to know that and understand that, and all the more reason to do that digging and give yourself that gift of understanding your body best. So head over to the link in my bio. It'll take you to my website where you can either schedule a consult together, or you can jump right into my Renew Your Gut program and we can get you off to the races. So excited to connect with you guys there, and we'll see you next week.